Welcome everyone on this very chilly Friday afternoon, but sunny here in Richmond. My name is Christina Stancho. I'm professor of English here and I direct the Humanities Research Center. And this is our first session of the semester, which always brings a lot of audience members. So we're excited that you are here, and this is part of our Research Fridays, which is an ongoing series dedicated to supporting both faculty and graduate students in research, mentoring, grant writing, and many other pursuits. Before we begin the introduction or the introductions today, I wanted to mention that the HRC again has a full slate of wonderful events this semester, and I hope you'll join us. I wanted to single out one upcoming event in the community. Next Saturday, in fact, on February 1st, at the Black History Museum and Cultural Center here in Richmond, we'll be co-hosting an event called Black History Found and Forged, chronicling the East Marshall Street Well Project. So all are welcome to come there. It's free and open to the public, so I hope to see some of you there. Today, we're very excited to look at competitive academic and professional environments for securing external funding. I wish I had taken one of these webinars when I was in graduate school, and I know we'll learn a lot today from three wonderful speakers whom I'll introduce shortly. We'll start with Mary Strawderman, who holds a bachelor's degree in anthropology and the master's degree in environmental studies from VCU, and who is currently working on a PhD in public policy and administration in the Wilder School. Excuse me. Currently, Mary works as a research development administrator in the VCU's Division of Research Development, or VPRI, where she facilitates research funding proposals, supports research teams, identifies funding opportunities, a very good person to know, and does a lot of other things, manages project timelines, oversees targeted activities, collects and analyzes data, and administers training. Previously, she worked on a federally funded community living grant project before going into research administration here at VCU. Next up, we have Dr. Jose Alcaine, who I know probably doesn't need a lot of introduction here at VCU, but I will just mention that he is currently the Director of Research Services and an affiliate assistant professor in the Department of Foundations of Education here in the School of Ed. And having benefited enormously from his expertise, I'm just so happy that he is here today. He brings this extensive experience in higher ed and research administration, where he's here at VCU involved in the school's research development, School of Education, proposal preparation and submission, faculty and graduate student professional development and programming, previously worked for the Office of Research, gaining a wide range of experience and institutional knowledge. So thank you so much for being here, Jose. And our last speaker is Dr. Meredith Sisson, who joined the National Scholarship Office here at VCU in 2016 after working in the National Fellowship Program at Johns Hopkins University, where she worked closely with applicants for the Fulbright U.S. student program and the Hopkins Hudson Scholars Program. She earned her PhD and MA in the history of art from Hopkins and her BA in art history from Dartmouth. We are so privileged to have the three of you here. Welcome. And I forgot to mention this webinar is targeted primarily at graduate students in the humanities and social sciences. If you're not in these disciplines, you are still welcome here. And after our panelists speak for about 15-20 minutes each, we'll have ample time for questions. So prepare them. We'll post them in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll address them in the order in which they're received. Mary, I will turn it over to you. Thank you so much all for being here.
Thank you for such great introductions. I will share the slides. Can you see the slides? Looks good. All right, thank you for joining us, everybody. We're going to talk about fellowship and grant writing for graduate students in the humanities and social sciences today. But as Dr. Stanchu was saying, some of this, if you're not in those fields, this might be still very applicable to you. Just a quick overview. I will be touching on finding funding today. Jose will be talking about applying, preparing, and managing those funds. And Meredith will touch on the application process and personal statement writing. So I'm going to throw the next slide. Well, here we are again, in case you forget what we look like. And then I'm going to toss this over to Jose before it comes back to me.
Yes, thank you, Mary, and thank you, Christina, for the introductions. And great to be here with you all and colleagues Meredith and Mary. So really excited to be part of this. Mary asked me to just say a few words of why, fellowships and grants might be important in your career development, and I've listed some of them here. Certainly not an exhaustive list. I am sure we can come up with many more, but I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts on why what we're talking about today might be important for your career development. Certainly, if you have a fellowship or are able to receive a fellowship or some sort of grant, which, by the way, I've helped doctoral students here at the School of Education get such grants. It might help you finish your dissertation. You might need some funding to incur some costs that you otherwise wouldn't get from perhaps your department or your program. So it gives you this agency that if you get a fellowship, your own fellowship or grant, all of a sudden you have resources to maybe complete your dissertation or your thesis project because you needed to travel or perhaps pay participants, etc. So it's hugely important, and this has certainly been the case with some of the doctoral students that I've worked with here at the School of Education. Um, Second bullet kind of associates to the first bullet, but it might help you, uh, even if it's not helping you complete a project, it might help you go to a conference. Let's say you've been accepted and now you have some funds to go to a conference and present. It might be an expectation of your program, department, school, or institution. So in other words, the culture that you might be in your department or discipline might say that it's common practice to pursue fellowships or grants as part of your training. Um, Certainly, as you look forward into the future for your career path, it might be uh, it might be an excellent thing to show on your CV that you've received a fellowship or a grant in your studies, and so that kind of sets you up and propels you for your promotion and tenure trajectory. So it shows your origin story, let's say, in fellowships and grants, and that you are able to write proposals and submit proposals, some of which we'll talk about today. Um, one of the things that I think sometimes gets overlooked, if it is part of the culture, you know, you might be pursuing this work because you're passionate about it. And so, because you're passionate about it, again, going to the issue of agency, getting a fellowship, your own fellowship and grant allows you to pursue that passion, regardless of, you know, perhaps limited resources in your program or department. Now, all of a sudden, you have uh, additional, like I was saying, resources to pursue your passion. So it can help you, get that really important work done to help society. Um, I put that there. They can also support your department in a way, if you are a top achieving student or otherwise get a fellowship or a grant, then your department, your institution, your discipline can now share with the world that you are one of their great graduate or doctoral students, and so it becomes this thing that advances not only you and your work, but your institution and department. And again, going back to the CV accolades, it might help you pursue your next job or your placement as you leave VCU in your program, because now you have this badge that you can share and show. So do some of these resonate with my colleagues, Meredith and Mary and Christina and Ronnie? So just a couple of words to encourage you and say that, you know, getting a fellowship or a grant is important and might be important for your career path.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to shift to finding funding, which I will cover. And so in my job, I help faculty with grant seeking. And I'm also a grad student who's been seeking support in professional development. So while I typically don't work directly with students, I have some differing levels of experience, but with that said, I also invite my co-presenters to chime in at any time if they have anything else to add to what I'm speaking on. So we're kind of starting this workshop off with the assumption that you're already ready to seek funding. And so this means that you might have a project or research idea you're interested in, or you like to pursue a fellowship, or maybe, you know, maybe you are thinking about things and need support developing that. And there's offices, a National Scholarship Office can certainly talk to you about that. So it's helpful to note, you know, we're starting with the assumption that you're ready to start looking. And also you should note, depending on the requirements of the funder, you may need several months of lead time to write your proposal, gather letters of recommendation, and get feedback from your mentor or advisor. And also I live in a grant world, so I might use certain language around funding or mentor that you might not use in your department, and I'm certainly not meaning to exclude anybody. So I hope that this can be very applicable to you. So before you start your search, or when you're searching, you want to keep a few things in mind. The very first thing you usually want to look at is to see if you're eligible. You really don't want to be spending your precious time on something to find out that you ultimately can't submit for it. That's a terrible feeling. And so as far as eligibility, the funder you're looking to seek support from might have specific criteria. They might you might need to be a full-time student. You might need to be at a certain stage in your program, and there might be citizenship requirements. So that's if you're sifting through a lot of things, that can be a really easy way to kind of decide what's in or out quickly. And of course, you want to be thinking about the type of funding you need. Are you looking for research grants and fellowships, or do you just need support for travel or conference attendance? It's helpful to look at the mission and goals of the organization. If your project aligns with that, it could be a really great fit. However, if your goals don't overlap, it might not be worth applying. They might not be interested in funding your project. So it's helpful to see that and maybe even talk to them, talk to a program officer if that's available. And they may also have specific requirements. If you receive funding from this sponsor, they might want you to serve on a board, attend a conference, or there might be specific deliverables or timelines that you may or may not want or be able to do. So it's helpful to kind of read through all of their, all the documents that they have around that funding. And you also want to be mindful of how much funding you need, though it is possible that you could cobble together funds from different sources, depending on what you're looking for. And then the last thing is to check on the funder's timeline. When is it due? When do they send out awards? Is there a project period that you're required to be done within? I just submitted a grant that was due in November, and I won't know the award status until the end of April. Once it's awarded, it will start in May, and I will only have a year to finish my research. So they really want to know that you can do it in that time. So it's good to plan ahead and start early just because of these timing constraints. Okay, so you're ready to find funding and you know what to look for, but you might be wondering, where do you look? So within your field, you might already know of some of the go-to options, but there's always more opportunities to explore. Your program or school might share opportunities with you. My program is so great about this. My program director regularly sends out opportunities, and I always check it out and make sure to see if I'm eligible first and see what the deadline is. And then I will, as quickly as I can, add a task to my calendar to check it out later and apply when I'm free. Another resource is your network. Talk to your peers, advisors, mentors. Many of them have experience securing funding and can point you towards opportunities you might not have considered. Some faculty have their CVs available. You might be able to check it out and see what kind of fellowships or grants they got when they were grad students. And your department might highlight students who've recently received an award or fellowship in their newsletter or somewhere else. And that can also be a really great place to start. Like, hey, my peer got this really cool award. I'm interested. I want to apply. Another great place to look is your professional and scholarly organizations. These groups might not just have one opportunity, but several. There might be like sub sections or chapters that offer funding for attending grants or other. There might be dissertation funding or other types of funding. So that's a really great place to look. And you can check with your department again as well. They're a great resource for you. And while they might not have large amounts of discretionary funds, they may be able to cover your membership in a professional organization that you might have to pay for before you can apply for funding. And some departments even have small research or travel grants available to you. So always check with your department. They're awesome resources. And as far as the professional organizations, I also recommend to cast a wide net. There might be organization that you might not think of, but your research aligns with their mission. So my personal research for my dissertation aligns with women's studies, higher ed, social science, and so on, which falls outside of or overlaps with my main field of public policy. So there might be like the main organization you know of, but there might be others that you can check out. And then there's also honor societies and other potential sources of funding. And I do want to note, for some of these organizations, you will likely need to search the website directly. I just submitted an application for conference funds for the section for women in public administration within a professional organization. And this is probably not on any curated list or funding database. However, curated lists can be super helpful and can save you a lot of time. Our own National Scholarship Office lists some common graduate opportunities on their website. And I've also listed some other institutions that have curated lists that you might want to check out. You can always, kind of do a Google search for curated lists at other institutions as well. If you're looking for nonprofit or foundation funding, Philanthropy News Digest can be a good source. It highlights grants in areas like education, medicine, arts, humanities. And then the Fogarty International Center may not be as relevant to this group, but if you do behavioral research, it can be a good place to look for international grants and fellowships. And if anybody has a go-to site or list, feel free to drop it in the chat and share with everybody. And lastly, I'm just going to talk about Pivot. We're going to do a walkthrough. This is a platform that we have access to at VCU, and it includes a really huge range of opportunities. You can set it up to receive a curated list of opportunities into your email inbox every week, and it's really nice. I'm going to send you guys this link so that you can register or sign up as we walk through. So hopefully you guys get that. If you're not registered, you can use that link to sign yourself up. And there's a lot of resources on how to use Pivot. Our very own VCU library has tips, Pivot has tips, and we have a cheat sheet that I will share with you guys today as well. And before we get started, just a couple of quick tips is Pivot does use Boolean operators, so it's helpful to keep in mind as you search. So like or and not to exclude or include certain things. So if I say jelly or jam, I will get either. But if I say jelly and jam, it would have to include both of those words. It's really helpful to know like the keywords for your research. There might be multiple, so you can say or for a lot of different similar things in your research to try to catch it all. And you can start wide and kind of add restrictions as you need to. And your department, your school should have an assigned research librarian that you can reach out to if you ever need assistance. So I'm just going to exit this and hop over to Pivot. Can everybody see Pivot? And hopefully, if you want to follow along in your own Pivot account, if you're able to register, you can. But I'm just here on the homepage. I can see my profile. You want to make sure you fill out your profile because the Pivot has something called your advisor. So it looks at kind of the keywords you fill out in your profile, and then it will send you a curated list every week, and you can refine that based on your preferences. So I have it enabled to send me an email every week, and it's based on my profile. So my advisor list that I get is maybe not super great right now. I can update my profile to be a little bit better, but I get a lot of cool opportunities for grad students, and I like to look through all of them. And then we'll go back home. And then Pivot also has curated opportunities. So there, somebody at some time at the institution has created a curated opportunity. So there's a list for the humanities. That can be a good place to start, to kind of check some things out that could be a possibility for you. And there's also a pre-doc funding that may or may not be helpful to look at. So those are the curated lists that were created by people at the institution. And then let's see, curated. And then you can have saved searches. So I do limited submissions at the institution through my job. So I have limited submission opportunities as my saved search. And I will show you right now how to do that. You will get this into your inbox every week with opportunities. So does anybody have any keywords that you want to, that you might want to search? If not, I can just kind of throw some things in there. All right, we've got mental health, queer studies, social science. Let's see, let's go for queer studies. So I searched queer studies and I have 1,877 results. That's a lot. I can't look through all of that. So I'm going to filter it. I'm going to go to the left-hand side here, and I'm only going to pick graduate student or pre-doc, and that makes it go down to 637. And I'm also going to pick USD. I don't know if I'm eligible to get funding from these places, and it might be more difficult, so I'm just going to go for USD. Now I have 556, which is still a lot. And I can continue to look at the side here and pare it down if I want, but I can also refine my search. And so here I can include or exclude. Down here, I'm going to exclude words or certain filters. So I might do queer studies and mental health. And actually, I might want to do that wild card because it might say queer study or queer studies, and this will just include the root word and any other iteration of that root word. The asterisk is really helpful. Okay, so I didn't find anything. So I might want to refine it again, and include more ors here. So let's see. I might think of like behavioral health. Maybe I'll just include the word mental, because maybe it's like mental health, mental wellness, and it'll catch all of that. No, okay. So this is where kind of casting a wide net, knowing a lot of keywords can be helpful, because I'm asking it to include this and this for grad students, to remind you. So maybe I'll do behavior. And maybe I'll just, let's see. All right, well, I'm going to go back to my original search. Okay, I'll go back to my original search. So sometimes you don't want to limit yourself too much, but having the wide net is a lot. Maybe I did something here.
Also, Mary, if I may, would you mind scrolling down just let's show them just real quick if you scroll down to the keyword section.
Oh,
Oops, sorry.
I
Um,
somehow,
I think you were, so if you scroll down to where it says keywords, and I know you know this, Mary, but just to show them, when you free type in that field section, you can start typing a keyword that you think is perfect. But more importantly, you can see how the database has defined the terms. And so one key thing is translating your otherwise perfectly keyword that you think is a perfect keyword to how the database, and remember, right, Mary, this is a curated sort of filtered product. And so it may be the case that you think you have your perfect keyword, but it's just that the database kind of has identified it a little bit more nuanced, if that makes sense. Um, right, Mary? And so you can see the path that they've defined in that
yeah,
keyword
that's
field.
helpful. Well, I'm just going to go back home and see what comes up again. Sometimes I get, sometimes I have issues using the database, so um, it's always helpful to reach out. So I'm going to filter it. So I have queer studies and mental health here. I have 188 results for grad students. And maybe I'll look at the first few pages, but if I can save my search. So I'll add my email and it'll send me an email every week along with my advisor results. And it'll only be new or updated opportunities. It won't be the whole list of 200, 188 opportunities. And so that you might need to be mindful of, because sometimes things aren't listed. They're like 2 or 3 months, the deadline's in 2 or 3 months. So it could be helpful to be mindful of what you get in your inbox might have a quick turnaround. So it can still be helpful to kind of do a search and go through. So I hope that was helpful. And I also, in the slideshow, I have the slide deck, there's a keyword tool. So if you have a certain area of research, you can there are tools that you can put your research into, and it'll help you find certain keywords. Because like I said, there might be a lot of things that your research can fall under, like mine does. Um, and the final thing I want to touch on is I just kind of want to make a point. This person has been applying for grants for the past 3 or 4 years. They have applied to a lot of different kinds of fields, so economics, social policy, women's studies, higher ed, public admin, honor societies, a lot of different grants they've applied to. And also, they've received a lot of rejection. So you might have a peer that has gotten some really cool, really awesome awards, but what you might not know is that they've applied to a lot and they've been rejected a lot. Rejection is normal. And don't let that stop you from being persistent. And I also note that half of the awarded funds here, or awarded opportunities, were applied to twice. So this one was applied for twice, this one was applied for twice, and they received that award. So of most opportunities you can apply for multiple times, and that this is true for faculty. You have much better odds on your second application. So don't let rejections make you stall any hope or progress on finding funding. And this is my team. If you ever have any questions, you can feel free to reach out directly to me or our team email. And I'm happy to I'll look at the chat and try to answer things if there's things there, and happy to take questions at the end. But otherwise, I'm going to hand it back over to Jose.
Thank you so much, Mary. And as I transition to the my slides, I would want to echo what Mary just shared with y'all that you know I think Pivot is a really good tool. Once you set up your searches, saving it is really helpful. I use Mary's feature as well. Saving it um, gets me those hits on the email. And also, I think was it I'm probably going to get this wrong, but the great philosopher on the Ice Cube, I think it was. Y'all may know Ice Cube. He said, I think something like a setback is nothing but a setup for a comeback. And I would echo what Mary said about rejection. It's just part of this submission process. So I would encourage you to just keep going. You'll get it. All right, so now I'm going to share a couple of things about grants more in general, and my colleague, Dr. Sisson, will really give you some great tips on um, all the great work that she does with the National Scholarship Office. But I'll talk about grants, through my experience, some tips, hopefully, that'll help you put things in context. So, Mary, if you advance to the next slide. Um, I'll talk about context because I think that's important, thinking about context, and then some tips about applying. And as I mentioned, my colleague, Dr. Susana, will really give you some important tips. So you better pay attention when she speaks. Um, definitely. Um, in the matter of context, so grants, what's the big deal? Why do people, so what, about grants? Well, a lot of people care about grants, um, as my colleague, Dr. Stanchu would know. And there's no lack of evidence to see that people care about grants. In the context of ECU, there was a recent, press release that we've yet again surpassed milestone in terms of external grant funding. Everywhere you look, even with Dr. Stanchu's Center for Humanities Research, you can see there's funding opportunities allotted to faculty to try to spur knowledge creation. I have a graphic there from the School of Education where we show, over the past 5 years, we've increased X number of percentage. There's programs to incentivize undergraduate students to get involved in research, like Europe, and the college also has students involved in research. Many of you are probably in the session. We also have, which I love, I've served as a judge for the VCU Graduate Research Symposium, where we have poster presentations, which are phenomenal to see all the work that y'all are working on and projects, faculty mentors projects, or your own projects. all that to say is that a lot of people care about grants. Some of the reasons I gave you at the beginning of why you might think about grant funding and fellowships and how it might help you personally in your career. So just know that this really helps the mission of the university, especially we are a research one. So if you go to the next slide, um, this is the VCU context, and we call these the pie charts. These are our vice president for research famous pie charts. Every year, people wait in anticipation to see these pie charts, to see, how much external funding we've gotten in terms of grants and how many people are grant active. A couple of things to say here. I won't dwell too much on these. These are from fiscal year 2023. So you saw the press release, we've surpassed 500 million, but this is from 23, which 460 something odd million. Um, we are a research one, so I talked about culture and context before. So in many disciplines at VCU, that is the anticipation that you'll be applying for grants as a faculty person. But this is the VCU context. And all that to say is if you go, you graduate and you get a job somewhere else at another institution, these pie charts might look a little bit different. So for example, if you graduate, get a job at, I don't know, as a faculty person at Virginia Tech, these will all be different. If you go to a teaching institution, this will be different. So keep that in mind as you go through your training and career. About the context is really important when it comes to grants and grant funding. Next slide. Just to give you an overview about the grant life cycle and just to generalize as well, we call it a life cycle because, it has a beginning with your idea that you create, you want to do a certain project. So it begins with that, and research development, and it goes all the way around till you spend all your funds, you close the grant, or you come up with your findings, you write a paper. So as you can see, there's a beginning and an end. And some of it we've talked about, and Mary helped us in this process. If you see, you identify funding, you apply for it, it gets reviewed, you get it, then you actually do the work. And as I mentioned, you close it out and then it starts over. So you can see how it's a cycle. Um, I do point out how important budgeting is in terms of not only helping you actually do the work and give you the resources, but as you develop your proposal, submit it, and as you manage the grant. Next slide. By the way, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to address either at the beginning. I like this graphic just to, again, have some basis for what a grant is. When you write a grant, it's not like writing your academic papers that you might in your discipline. And I like this graphic. I have the reference to the peer review paper that this is based on. The paper itself, it gets a little bit repetitive, but this table one, I think very succinctly gives you a snapshot and some commentary on the difference between a grant and, the papers that you might be used to. I'm not going to go through all of those. You can review them. Most of them are kind of explanatory, but I will just show you the first one, even just the first one. The first one you can see on the right under grant writing. When you write a grant, it's not about you. It's about how your work can perhaps match or advance or be compatible with, support the mission of whoever's going to give you the money. Does that make sense? And you have to meet certain requirements for them, for the sponsor, not for you. And so there's that service attitude, like how can your work your knowledge, your inquiry, advance not only your work, but also the work of whoever's going to give you the money, based on some conditions. Does that make sense? As opposed to on the left, when I'm writing my academic paper, it's about my passion, my jam, right? So it's more about me. Whereas when I'm writing a grant, it's more about my work and how it advances, more service-oriented, how it advances the sponsor's aims, if that makes sense. So I'll leave you with that. You can review that later. It's a really good graphic to, again, give you some pointers about what grant writing is and is not. Moving on to, again, general comments, dissecting funding opportunities, and Mary alluded to this, funding opportunities really boils down to, what is the program about? Why is it important for this organization or sponsor to be giving this money out? Like, what's their mission? What's their role in society? Who are the stakeholders? All of that you might necessarily get from the funding opportunity announcement and who's giving the money out. Also, when you look at funding opportunities, what are the rules? You'll have some directions in the call for applications or the funding opportunities. More importantly, they'll give you sort of like how much money you can ask for, what conditions are, and requirements. So if you can boil it down to these questions, I think any funding opportunity you meet, you'll kind of get the sense of dissecting the opportunity. Okay, next slide, Mary. I've included here some what I call ingredients. So now you've identified the funding, you've identified the sponsor that's going to give you the money, and now you're ready to submit your proposal. What are the ingredients? So like, what do you have to put together in the proposal to be able to submit it for consideration or for review? So again, this will be evident in the directions that you get or the funding call. For example, a really important one is how much room do I have to tell the funder what I'm going to do and what my aims are, what my research question is. How many pages do I have in the grant narrative? Usually that falls into the grant narrative. Very important. You want to know, how succinct do I need to be? Any special formats you have to heed to, that'll be spelled out, and that's an important ingredient. Mary talked about letters of support as well. Do you need those? Do you not need those? Is your mentor? Is it your chair, etc.? What kind of approvals? And I've mentioned the budget limit. So how much within a certain budget, what do you need to tell them in the proposal to meet that threshold? Next slide. Elemental question here. What is a budget? Many of you, I'm sure, go through this with your own budgets, personal budgets. How much money do you have to spend? Likewise, on a basic question, what is a budget? It's an estimate of the work you want to do. And then given the work, you allocate costs. Key thing is, what you propose in your narrative should be reasonable given the money that you'll be getting. We call that the scope of work. So your budget should match what you attempt to do. Then there's usually a budget narrative that goes along with the budget where you explain in a narrative form what you are requesting in your budget forms. And again, the word estimate is really applicable here. You're putting your budget together now, but the work you might do sometime later, and so what you think a cost is now might change by the time you're doing the work, and that's where the project management really comes in. Next slide. Some tips there on how to estimate costs. Look, okay, I'm putting my budget together. How do I even know what, where do I get costs to put into my budget? Some tips are there. For example, if you're a grad student, you might know what your stipend is if you get a stipend. Travel, there's a lot of aids for that, and at VCU we have a travel agency that we're supposed to be using, so you can get cost estimates if you have to travel. Supplies, it's easy to get in terms of through catalogs or quotes. I put their student support, you know how much your tuition is, so that's a pretty easy cost to estimate to estimate. We know the high cost. Indirect costs I put there, that's kind of like overhead, and that'll be a given. So a couple of these things will be given to you, for example, your stipend level, salaries, etc. I do put other there. Gift cards tend to be sometimes, especially with student projects, a normal cost because you're going to have participants that'll take part in your study, and so you want to give them uh, some remuneration in terms of gift cards. Next slide, please. And then you get to actually doing the work once you're successful. And I put a joke there, you're on your own. You're not really. Mary mentioned this earlier, rely on your advisors, mentors, your department resources. On fellowships, and maybe my colleague can attest to this. Depending on the fellowship, sometimes the money can come directly to you, and so it's important to pay attention to what the requirements are. If that's the case, a lot of the times the money or the award will come to the institution that you're part of, but there are fellowships that I can think of where the money might go directly to you as the individual. In any of these cases, it's important to pay attention to what the requirements are. If it is given to the institution, more often than not, there's like a project account that gets set up for you. In the case that I mentioned for a doc student that I helped get some funding at the School of Education, we set up an internal account where she would spend her the funds from. Paying attention to dissemination efforts or how to close out the grant, like what the implications are in that example that I'm giving you for School of Education. There was an expectation at the end of the grant, all the money spent, and a paper was written for sharing, if that makes sense. Next slide. And please feel free, you are empowered to ask questions. I think it's a very powerful tool. If you don't know anything, reach out to us, to your faculty mentors, chairs, etc. And so I thank you so much. I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Dr. Sisson.
Thanks, Jose. Hi, y'all. I'm Meredith Sisson. I'm the Associate Director of the National Scholarship Office. And I will tell you a little bit about what we do on the next slide. But I just wanted to say up front that I'm going to be talking about fellowships, which are different from grants. There are some fellowships that call themselves grants, which makes it confusing, like the Fulbright US Student Program calls themselves, they are giving you a grant, even though in my world, we would call it a fellowship because these are individual awards that are awarded to you, not to your research. So I'm making the distinction between grants that are specific to a research project that you propose, and that is what the foundation is funding, versus a fellowship, which is funding you, the graduate student. All right, so who's the NSO, the National Scholarship Office? We are a free resource to you. We work with undergraduate and graduate students across both campuses as well as alumni. And so if after you graduate, you're like, ooh, I think I want to apply for a Fulbright, you are always welcome to circle back to us, and we are happy to help. The ways in which we help, for some of our awards where we have a lot of applicants, we have pretty comprehensive sets of resources like Canvas courses, writing workshops, panels, reviews, fill in the blank. It's all there. For others, we work with you one-on-one. And so we're happy to go over the application requirements with you, to brainstorm ideas, to read your materials, give you feedback, cheer you along. And I just pulled out 3 of the awards, the biggest awards that, well, in the humanities and social sciences that we work with. So Fulbright, Boren, and critical language scholarships. And in the last 5 years alone, we've had 66 recipients for those 3 awards. Next slide, please. So here's my agenda. I'm going to be focusing on the application process. And as part of that, I'll talk about personal statement writing as well. And some of what I have to say will overlap with what my colleagues have already introduced. So I'll try and breeze past that quickly, but wanted to give you the full picture. So next slide, please. All right, so the application process, this is part of the planning phase. You have to start early. You have to, because a lot of these awards have deadlines that are maybe even a full year before your funding would start. I think it's a really good idea when you start graduate school to sit down with your advisor or with a mentor and even sort of map out what kinds of awards might I need at different times. And so my next slide, I'll get into that in more detail. In my experience, so I'm an art historian and I've applied for a lot of these pre-doctoral dissertation completion research fellowships over the course of my graduate school career. And I find that most deadlines in the humanities are sometime between late August on the very early end through like mid-November. Most of them are going to fall in October, and maybe like up to the first week in November. Second point, you have to have a conversation with your advisor. Usually this is a good thing. Sometimes it can be tricky. There's no end run around your advisor. They are super important to every application. It's a huge red flag to a review committee if you don't have a letter of recommendation from your advisor. But also, like, this is the person who is shepherding you into your profession, right? You need them on board so that they can be a door opener, and advocate for you. Then, as you've heard already, talk to other grad students, talk to alumni of your program, talk to folks in your field, even if they're not at VCU. If there are awards that you're interested in, a lot of them have lists of previous grantees or recipients, and you can go on the website, you can Google folks. Usually people are excited to tell you about their fellowship experience. And a good question to ask them is, what do you wish you knew when you were applying? Get that sort of insider scoop. And then finally, you saw a spreadsheet that Mary shared, but it's really good to keep an even more detailed one that has deadlines, requirements, and just to keep everything organized so you know what's due and when. All right, next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there are different kinds of awards that you can apply for. There are some short-term research fellowships, and here I'm just throwing some examples. These are not at all a comprehensive list. But for example, the Huntington Library has short-term research fellowships where you can get money and an invitation to come to the Huntington Library to do research in their collections. And those tend to be collections-based, or in an archive or something like that, but not necessarily limited to. The big swath of awards you're going to be considering are pre-doctoral fellowships. Some of these are early career awards, but most of them are going to come into play at the ABD phase. So once you have completed whatever comprehensive exams and proposed your dissertation. But for example, the Fulbright US student program does not require ABD status, and actually neither does Mellon ACLS, but a lot of them are going to want you to have the status of a PhD candidate. There are language study awards if you are doing international research, that those can be very helpful. Another one on that list could be the Fulbright Hayes, DDRA, that's the Doctoral Dissertation Research Award. And those are different kinds of awards for doing research abroad and supporting actually language acquisition. And then there are dissertation completion fellowships, which are funding to get you through that final push, usually last year of writing. And those are also ones that are going to want you to prove your timeline that you are ready for that kind of funding. Next slide, please. So in terms of crafting your application, I'm going to put in a shameless plug for my office here. Come meet with us. We are a small but mighty team of 2 plus a grad assistant right now. Thank you, graduate school. And we can help with all phases of applying for one of these kinds of fellowships. So we can help with organizing the process, brainstorming what goes into the essays, really understanding all the components. We can read your materials and provide feedback along the way. And it's as you need it. We don't have any rules about how many times you have to or are limited to meeting with us, or how many times you could share drafts with us. And so I've added the link there to make an appointment. It's also on our website. Our website is just nso.vcu.edu, and every page of our website in the top right corner has a link to make an appointment. And you can just find a time that works for you. Next slide, please. So my number one piece of advice in crafting an application is to start writing early and often. This is a kind of writing that you don't do in the course of your general studies. It is a genre that you have to learn by doing. I can tell you lots of ways to go about it, and I'll give you some tips and tricks here, but you have to do it, and you have to get feedback, and you have to learn in that way. And so this is the kind of writing that is going to take drafts and drafts and drafts. When I was a graduate student, I was like, I'll give 3 weeks to every application and that will be enough. And now that I'm in this profession, I laugh at my past self because usually, maybe by the last one, 3 weeks is sufficient. But for the first one, months, give it months. Especially if you're looking for our help, because we work with lots of folks. I just did this math the other day for a data collection I was asked for, that we have between 700 and 800 student meetings a year. And that's over 500 individual students in a given academic year. So if you want our help, make sure you just give us time to fit you in. And so we really encourage you to share your drafts broadly, especially with your peers. Other students in your program or even across different programs, are really wonderful resources. I encourage you to start writing groups to hold yourself accountable, so that you're sharing either a fellowship draft every couple of weeks, or a couple pages of your dissertation every couple of weeks. You all are really important resources for each other, but of course we're here. The Writing Center is a great resource. Your advisor is an essential resource. Other faculty mentors. Your librarian can be an amazing resource. And so please, not only don't be afraid to ask for help, but make sure that you are proactive in asking for help, because it's essential. All right, next slide. So as far as crafting a personal statement, you are writing for a specific opportunity. Mary mentioned that it's important to know the mission and the goals of the opportunity to determine whether it's a good fit for you. But it's essential to know that, so that you can prove that you are a good fit for them, and that they are also going to help you accomplish your goals. You need to know why the funders are looking to fund folks. And if you can prove to them in your statement that you are going to do whatever it is that they are looking for you to do, you are much more likely to be successful. You do need to be authentic. This is a paper, just like you write papers, but it's about you. So you still need to have a thesis. You need to have examples and proof of your claims, but your proof of your claims are going to be anecdotes and examples from your own life. Every sentence needs to do heavy lifting. So you're not telling that you don't want to say, you know, for a Fulbright example, which is an award that would take you abroad to do research for a year. The sentence that I most love to hate is, I want to do a research grant in Italy because I want to expose myself to the culture and immerse myself in the language. That is 100% true for literally every single person writing that application, and it is a waste of space in your essay. And so make sure that every sentence is doing heavy lifting and is telling your reviewer something new about you. And then the last point, carry your reader from your past to explain your present to prove your future. So this statement, unlike a research statement, this is a professional biography where a lot of the real estate is going to go to your past, but that is all in the service of explaining where you're going, right? It's in service of the future. And so you need to convince your reader that by funding you, that they are helping to create future rockstar you. So you need to have a clear picture of who future rockstar you is. They need to believe that the path from current day you to future rockstar you is through their opportunity. And so you're connecting past to present to future in this essay, even if maybe even 2/3 or 3/4 of the space is given to past examples. Next slide, please. You need letters of recommendation, and for the service of time, I'm going to speed through this quickly. You'll get these slides, but these letters are very, very important. And so it's really important to forge strong relationships with your faculty, both here at VCU, in your department and outside of your department, but also outside of VCU. So going to conferences is really important. Being part of your national organization is really important. Sharing your work with those people is really important. And this is where you just have to be brave, and you have to send emails to people you might feel uncomfortable emailing. And just, you know, what's the worst that'll happen is they won't respond. Next slide, please. And so the review process, once you hit submit, your application will usually be checked first for eligibility, and then we'll go through either 1 or 2 rounds of review. That's typical. If you're going through 2 rounds of review, you probably have 2 different audiences of reviewers. And you may or may not be told in the interim whether your application is moving on to the next round. And so this is a lot of, it depends on the award. But often your reviewers will read and score on their own time and then meet as a panel to discuss applications. If you're curious, I can go into more detail, but the ones that everyone agrees on either go forward or don't, with no conversation. And then it's always the one in the middle, or where reviewers have differences of opinions that get the most time in these panels. You need to know who's reading your application, not necessarily the individual people. You probably will never learn that, but what kinds of people. So I'll go back to Fulbright, for example. They have 2 rounds of review. The first round is here in the US, where you have region or country specific experts. So you may not have anybody in your field reading your application, but they will be people who are very familiar with the country or the region to which you are applying. In the second round, it goes to the host country, and you have folks from the Fulbright Commission. So that could include government officials from the US Embassy. It could involve former Fulbrighters at the scholar or the student level. It could involve just regular staff from the country who work in the Fulbright Commission. And so they might literally know zero, zilch, nothing about what you are specializing in. Other awards will have folks specifically from your field who will be reading your materials. Others will be like humanities experts, but not necessarily in your specific discipline. So you really want to know that so that you are using the right level of specificity in your application. General rule of thumb, though, if I can read it and understand what you're talking about, you're probably in good shape. And then occasionally you might have an interview, although that is not often part of the process. The last thing that I'll say is that you will not get an award many more times than you will get an award. And disappointment is part of the process, but it can only take one sometimes. That fellowships can get fellowships, and they open doors to other opportunities, because once you are vetted by a funding panel, other funding panels will be like, well, if so-and-so thought that they were worthy of funding, we should probably give them more consideration as well. So disappointment management is important, but knowing how valuable this process is can help you get through that disappointment. Obviously, I'm biased because this is my job, but I didn't know what my dissertation was really about, what I was trying to prove, until I had to apply for fellowships, because you have to develop your story. You have to understand not just who you are as a scholar, but what your research is doing, how it fits into the bigger picture in your discipline, beyond your discipline, why it is significant. Telling these stories are really essential, not only to your graduate career, but to getting a job, to getting grants later on, and to forging collaborations. And so I think it's really important, and I hope you do too. And so my last slide is just, here's who we are. You can get in touch with us in all of these ways. I hope that you will. You can follow us on social media. We post lots of interesting things there. But if you go to our blog, you will see our spring schedule posted. So we have lots of info sessions coming up, including one that is specific for graduate students. And so I hope that you will join us for some or multiples of those. Thank you.